California, hosted by Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee, aptly named Nixon to Trump: Perspectives on Presidential Accountability. Representative Lee will be joined by experts and friends of our show, John Dean and Malcolm Nance, in a conversation about Trump's scandal-ridden presidency. And it will also address calls for impeachment from her constituents in the East Bay. And joining me now is Representative Barbara Lee herself, a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee who controls the federal purse strings, and our very own MSNBC contributor, Malcolm Nance. All right, thank you both for being here. And Representative Lee, I'm going to go with you first. Why this event today, and what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I think it's so important that the public continue to be engaged with regard to presidential accountability. There's so many issues that need to be unraveled, and I'm so pleased that Mr. Nance and Mr. Dean will be with us today, because I was an intern for the great Congressman Ron Dellums during the Watergate era, and I swear it feels like that. And my councils have passed resolutions calling for investigations to continue, and so I think the public all around the country needs to know what is taking place, uncover the facts, of course call for a bipartisan independent commission. Congresswoman Karen Bass held one in Southern California. We're doing one today in Berkeley, and I hope that people around the country will hold presidential accountability forums and town meetings.
And Malcolm, you've had a few members of the United States Senate who've been on the Sunday shows this morning. I want to play one of them, Dianne Feinstein, also of California. She was on Face the Nation this morning talking about the Russia investigation. Take a listen.
Do you get the sense that the federal investigation into this includes something beyond just the question of Russia and the Trump campaign, but that it now includes a cover-up question?
Well, I think that's right. It does. I know what the president told me when he called to say that he was firing him, and that turned out not to be the reason.
So, Malcolm, I'll ask you basically the same question. How wide-ranging do you think that this investigation ultimately will go?
Well, as I wrote in my book, Plot to Hack America, which I'm going to be discussing with John today, who was in the Watergate trials, 9 months ago, we saw that this was going to go in multiple directions, but its main thrust and the part that everyone is, they think this is 500 different little parts. It's not. It's one thing, and that is the Russian intervention in the U.S. elections for the first time in the nation's history. And now it's just a component of, did the administration know anything about it? Were there other American citizens who may have been involved with the known Russian intelligence officers who did this act? So I think it's going to go in many, many different areas because it involves finance and in some cases perhaps even espionage.
I think that is what frustrates a lot of people, Representative Lee, quite frankly. I mean, we've been talking about Russian interference with Malcolm literally since last July. I feel like Malcolm and I have done the same show over and over and over again, week after week after weekend, going back to last summer. But people are behaving as if this is something that cropped up after Donald Trump was elected. How is it that the entire country and the government apparatus has been so inert about what Russia has done to our country since more than a year ago?
And it's unfortunate that at every step of the way we have seen the White House attempt to quash these investigations. We saw what the Intelligence Committee chair, his behavior, he had to recuse himself. We see that Attorney General Sessions had to recuse himself, and then he crops up later in the firing of FBI Director Comey. We see the president providing classified information to the Russians, hoping that this would end the investigation. So every step of the way, you have seen attempts to make sure that the public is not informed, that this investigation does not move any further. But I tell you one thing, now with regard to the special counsel now, looking at both investigation as well as the possible obstruction of justice, possible collusion with the Russians during the elections. I think once we get an independent bipartisan commission established, and hopefully Republicans will sign on to that, we can really expose what has actually taken place. And so it takes time, but we need to really rev this up, and that's why these forums around the country are extremely important.
And Malcolm, from the point of view of an intelligence professional, how successful of an operation was it, from Russia's point of view, to have had Michael Flynn, a potentially compromised person, even for 27 days, become the national security advisor of the United States, despite all the warnings about him?
Well, it's terrifying. And if quite honest with you, we have no clue as to the depth of what actually happened here with Michael Flynn. You have to remember, he was one of the first American officers ever to visit the headquarters of Russian military intelligence back in 2013 when he was still director of Defense Intelligence Agency. Then was soon after fired, and he became a disgruntled, very high-ranking intelligence person. And in the regular world, that wouldn't matter very much. They would go off and become a defense contractor. He went in and started dealing with foreign governments for pay, and the Russians paid him. That would be the first entryway to turning somebody into an asset or, in the worst case, an agent for that nation. For him to ascend to where he was is, I know everyone I speak to in the intelligence community, from junior baby operator up to senior deputy, former directors of the CIA and NSA, everyone is alarmed that this could possibly be the greatest Russian intelligence operation in history, and Michael Flynn may have been part of their operation.
And Congresswoman, as we all know, the impeachment, which is a word being thrown around a lot, emerges from the House of Representatives. And yet the party on the other side, the Republicans who control the House of Representatives, have been almost unanimous in their unswerving support for Donald Trump. You're starting to see a few cracks in at least the rhetorical support for him, although they haven't taken much action. But let's just jump over to the Senate side for a minute and let you listen to Marco Rubio, who sort of, I guess he would sort of be Exhibit A of what Republicans think and say about Trump. Take a listen.
If any president tries to impede an investigation, any president, no matter who it is, by interfering with the FBI, yes, that would be problematic. It would be not just problematic, it would be, obviously a potential obstruction of justice.
What would it take, just from your day-to-day conversations with Republicans in the House, for them to move from that sort of blandly chastising rhetoric about any president potentially doing anything that sounded like it may be obstruction of justice to actually holding the current president accountable?
Well, these investigations will determine whether there was obstruction of justice, and Joy, obstruction of justice constitutes grounds for impeachment. And so the Republicans need to understand that. They need to be for real. They need to go where the facts lead. And hopefully they will sign on to our bipartisan commission, because this will make sure that the investigation moves forward in a more expedited and objective manner. But you do hear more Republicans now beginning to question the behavior and actions of this president, and I tell you, what Mr. Nance and Mr. Dean will talk about this afternoon will give us even more information with regard to how these investigations should move forward, so that we can make sure that the American people know exactly what took place and what the consequences are. And
Malcolm, lastly to you, if a commission were to be formed, what should it attempt to do and attempt to discover?
Well, of course, now we have a special counsel, so he is going to be carrying out the broad range but very deep dive investigations using the FBI and other agencies. So anything beyond that, if there's going to be a commission further on, its #1 goal would have to be to determine, how did we get here? How did we get to a situation where a foreign nation and its intelligence agencies could actually try to affect an election outcome? What systems did they use? How did they use them? Were Americans complicit? If they were complicit, why did they do that? And did anybody else, and did any other thing, including the media, did they contribute to this? That's what the job, I think, of a commission would be. But now you've got the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, who will probably defer more to the General Counsel's investigation. But, once all this is washed out, and we find that whether there was any criminality or whether people were completely innocent and it was all just the Russians, then we need to have a national dialogue about just exactly how do we never get to this point again, and how do we restore the nation back to norms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll get an amen on that one on this Sunday. Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Malcolm Nance, best of luck with that event today. Thank you. And say hi to John Dean.
We'll live stream this, Joy, this afternoon on my Facebook page for those who would like.